tonight we have a return visit by Kevin Rowan-Drewitt, and if any of you were here last year for his runic workshop, it was really something, I tell you, missed a treat. So I'm sure you're in for yet another treat tonight. So I'll just hand over to Kevin.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fran. Can you all hear me okay? Jolly good. I won't stand up because this time last year I dislocated and broke my ankle in 2 places. And since then, if I stand up still for about more than 5 minutes, my left leg goes numb and I fall over, which is very entertaining, but not so good for public speaking, really. So, but anyway, the pictures are all going to be up there, so and it's a big illustrated talk. Okay. I also have a bit of a chesty cough, so if I have a coughing fit, don't worry about it. I'm just here to infect you all. Anyway, so tonight the talk is about Neolithic observatories. What I'm going to go through is quite a few old ancient Neolithic sites, showing you how the Neolithic people aligned their stone circles, their chambered tombs and whatever, these ancient sites with the sun, the moon, Venus and the stars. And I've been to every single one of the sites that I'm going to show you as well. So I've been travelling around ancient sites now for about 26, 27 years. So I have quite a bit of experience. And if you have any questions, do feel free to butt in, just in case. I know some people say questions at the end, but sometimes you think of something and then by an hour later you've forgotten it. So, and I'm quite happy, I can pick it up, I'm quite used to it. So if you do have a question, please feel free to speak up. So anyway, so for thousands of years, people have been, humankind has been fascinated by the night sky. If you get into a lovely place like Cumbria, far away, I mean, I come from Blackpool, and trying to observe anything in Blackpool with the night sky is damn near impossible, because we have some of the worst light interference that there is. But if you can get out into a nice quiet area where it's all nice and dark, you just see billions and billions of stars. And to this end, for years we have built telescopes, radio telescopes, observatories. We sent rockets to explore the space, and we got the Hubble telescope, which is there on the bottom right. Now, Neolithic people, they were just as fascinated. The Neolithic just means New Stone Age. We're talking about 5,000 years ago. Those people were just as fascinated as we are now. Of course, in those days they didn't have television, or there's no Coronation Street to watch. So at night they just observed the planets. Oh. Boom, boom, out go the lights. That's nice. An hour ago we didn't have any light in here. We were going to be by candlelight, which would have been quite romantic, wouldn't it? But anyway, so what did the Neolithic people do? They built hundreds of sites with alignments to the sun, the moon, Venus and the stars. So I'll show you, in fact, does anybody know where that one is? Yes, it is. It's Callanish. Callanish A on the Outer Hebrides on the Isle of Lewis. Wonderful site that for 1,000 years was covered in peat. And because of the remoteness of the island and the fact that the stones were all covered over, it's almost complete. So it's a fascinating one. Then we have this one. Bit of a way to go. This one's in Cornwall, a wonderful place called Loo. Lovely stone circle there, very accessible. It's just in like the back, to go down the side of a house. There's just a little track, and you're there. And the stones are only about as high as you are, but they're all made of quartz, so they glisten in the sun. It's quite nice. I think everybody knows this one, don't they? So here we have Stonehenge, of course, which is aligned with the summer sunrise and the winter sunset, as well as having all the extreme positions of the sun and moon, but we'll go into that later. This is Bryn Cyddi Ddu, which is in Anglesey. Me and Neil here. This is Neil of Megalithic Tours, who I've done quite a few tours with him. We're off to Anglesey tomorrow, and this is one of the sites that we're going to go to. This is, I say it's on the Isle of Anglesey. I actually went there for the eclipse in 1999, which was fascinating because I thought I'd have the place all to myself, and so did about the other 50 people that had turned up. And what was really nice, it must have been something like it was in the olden days, because everyone had turned up with sandwiches and beer, and they had their telescopes, eclipse glasses, bowls of water, binoculars and all this, and everyone, it was a real communal spirit, and it was really, really nice. And it was really cloudy, and we thought, oh, nothing's happening. About 5 minutes before the eclipse, the clouds parted and we saw it, and it was like 95%, so it was pretty impressive. The light all went down. It was a fascinating place to be. Anyone been here at all? It's Newgrange in Ireland. I know it looks like a giant UFO. This was restored in the 60s. A wonderful Neolithic site. This one is aligned with the midwinter sunrise, and also it's aligned with the Venus rise as well. And this is Callanish again. This one is aligned with the extreme position of the moon. This is Stanton Drew, which is a place called Chew Magma, which is just south of Bristol on the way towards Bath. Fantastic, amazing. It's the second biggest stone circle in Britain after Avebury. And it's 3 circles all in a line, and they're aligned with the summer sunrise. Has a wonderful pub as well called the Druid's Arms. and in the beer garden is 3 more of the stones. So the pub is actually within the ancient site itself. Anyone been here? This is much closer to home. Long Meg, yeah, Long Meg and her daughters. About 8 miles to the east of Penrith in the Eden Valley. The 3rd largest stone circle in Britain. This is aligned with the midwinter sunset.
Now, excuse me.
Yes?
You talked about the alignment with the winter sunset. Now, I went there at a winter sunrise, solstice sunrise. Does it come up in the niche of the Pennine Escarpment?
Yes, it has a wonderful name, if I can only remember it. It has some very dark sort of name. There's actually a ley line that runs right from Castle Rig through Long Meg and Little Meg to the Pennines. So it does. There is an alignment that way. You've been to this one? If you've been to Penrith, you've driven right past it. This is Maybury Henge. There's 1 solitary stone in the middle. There used to be 8 there, and that one's aligned with the equinox sunrises. That's the solitary stone in the middle. It's about 20 tons and about 10 foot high. When, as Fran was saying, when I gave my talk about runes here, when I make my rune sets, I like to make them out of 1 branch of wood, and I collect that branch of wood from Maybury Henge, because as you can see, there's those old dead trees there, and normally with it being windy up in Cumbria and all that, the branches are down. So wherever I go to Maybury Henge, I always make sure I've got a blanket, and I fill the back of the car up with branches from the trees of Maybury Henge. So when you make your runes with me, you're making it from some wood that's been given from an ancient site. I never break anything. They're always ones that are blown down. So it's a lovely place. Very creepy to be at night, I can tell you that much. This is Castle Rig. I expect you've all been there, haven't you? I've been there over 100 times. It's my favourite stone circle. This is aligned with the extreme rising and settings of the sun and the moon, and also the sunrises on the 8 days of the ancient Celtic calendar as well, which I'll go into later. And this is the Cove, a rather unique formation that lies within Castle Rig. And those 3 stones there on the left, no good me pointing here, is it? So, but those 3 ones, the nearest one to you and the other 2 behind it, are exactly aligned east, so they're aligned with the equinox sunrises. Now, the story actually begins with this book, the Books of Enoch. Now, of course, there's no contemporary record of written at the time, because all these sites go back thousands of years. But the first written record comes from the Books of Enoch, and Enoch is mentioned in the Bible as the great-grandfather of Noah. The book was written about 200 BC by various authors, and it was discovered by James Bruce, who was the descendant of Robert the Bruce, and he was also a Freemason, and he found these books in 1765 in Africa. Then 1998, 99 was it? 99. These two Freemasons, Christopher Knight and Robert Lomas, they wrote this book, Uriel's Machine, and they looked into the story in the Book of Enoch. The actual purpose of this book originally was to find the roots of modern Freemasonry, and they were trying to go back as far as they can. Have we got any No, you're not allowed to say, are you? But if we have any Freemasons, you'll be familiar with what they reenact is the Temple of Solomon, so going back a long way. But what they found was, the more they looked back, the more they got taken back into the Neolithic times and the story of Uriel, who built this machine that you could record the rising and settings of the sun and the moon. And they found that actually that this book, the book called the Book of Heavenly Luminaries, it had a great deal of astronomical knowledge in it. Now the story says that the angel Uriel, which was literally the light of God, he took Enoch to see this machine with portals in which you could observe the rising and setting of the sun, the moon, and the stars. And there he goes, being taken away up to heaven. Now these two Freemasons, Knight and Lomas, they then wanted to consider how such a machine could have been built. Now, if you observe the sunrises and sunsets over a year, you'll notice that the sun moves along the horizon. It rises most northeasterly at the summer solstice and most southeasterly at the winter solstice. And the equinoxes, the sun rises and sets exactly east and west. So if you're doing this, if you've got nothing else to do with your time, you can, like the Neolithic people had, apart from trying to survive, this is how you can build it. So you have one centre sight line, and then you get the other person when the sun comes up to stand there with a pole, and then you just bash it into the ground, and then you do that, and you keep doing this throughout the year. And if you do that, you end up with a machine that looks like this. So this is what they postulated that Uriel's machine would have looked like. And Knight and Lomas actually physically went and built one on a site appropriately of a stone circle in Yorkshire. A very weird thing happened about this book, Uriel's Machine, actually. I was invited by the Scottish Astrological Association in 2000 to go and give a talk about the Celtic Wheel of the Year. And mind you, I thought the Scots would have known about the Celtic Wheel of the Year, but they didn't. So I go up to this wonderful place in Edinburgh. It's the home of the Scottish Theosophical Society. And it's a bit daunting because at the back of the room is this black and white picture of Madame Blavatsky with a veil over it. And it's like she's staring at you the whole time, which is a little bit spooky and puts you off. But anyway, as I was going up there, before I went up there, my friend Barbara gave me this book, Uriel's Machine. She said, "Here, Kevin, you'll enjoy this." So I'm reading through the book because I was up there. I thought, no point in going up to Edinburgh for one day. I'll go up in the half term because I work in a school, and I'll go up there for the week and we can see the sights because I hadn't been to Edinburgh before, and we could do a bit of touristy stuff and go to the castle and go down the Royal Mile and stuff. And suddenly I start reading about this ancient church up there, and this was before the Da Vinci Code, and what's it called? It begins with R. Rosalind, thank you. I'm getting old, I'm getting these brain failures. Yeah, and I've read, oh, this is all very interesting, Roslin Chapel, blah, 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 and it's 6 miles south of Edinburgh. I thought, oh, we'll go there tomorrow. So, interestingly enough, and I went there, and again, it's built by the Freemasons, and there was a whole Freemasonry thing in there, so it all sort of tied in quite nicely. And very fortunate. So, there's all the extreme positions marked, and I don't suppose you can see that, but that's showing you all the extreme positions of the sun and the moon. Now, the thing about it is, the sun, of course, it only takes 1 year to sort it out, but the moon has an 18.61 year cycle. Wherever the moon is tonight, I mean, I know it's up in the sky, but we get the exact position where it is tonight. It won't be there again for another 18.61 years. So to get the extreme positions of the moon, you have to observe for nearly 19 years, and then you have to observe another 19 years to make sure it's correct, and another 19 years to really be sure. And as these people only lived about 30, 40 years, this must have been going on for generations. So that's the extreme positions, and that's sort of what it looks like in stone, basically. So again, you've got all the extreme rise in the setting positions of the sun. Now you've got this at Castle Rigg. You've got the extreme positions there of the sun and the moon, as I say, and on the right-hand side, on the flattened bit of the circle, there's all the sunrises in the 8 days of the Celtic Wheel of the Year. So, who discovered these alignments with the sun and the moon? Well, it's another point with Castle Rigg. If you look at, so if you think of that as a clock face, at 1 o'clock there's a missing stone, and that's the most northerly rising moon. And as I say, I've been to Castle Rigg many times, and I've looked at this, and at ground level you can't really see that there was ever a stone there. But then I found this aerial photograph, and you can actually see the place where the stone was. There is a slight mark in the ground, but you can only really see it from above. And also, I don't know if you can see those diagonal lines going across where it's been ploughed. You can't see that on the ground either. You can only really see it from the air. It's a bit of a strange phenomenon. That's the cove there at 4 o'clock. Now, this is the person who we have to thank. Does anybody know who this is? His name's I know you will. He's Professor Alexander Tom. An amazing guy. He worked at the University of Oxford. He designed a wind tunnel there, which is still there, and he was involved with Barnes-Wallis in the development of the bouncing bomb. And one of the buildings there is the Tom building, and that's still there to this day. And it's actually the University of Oxford that allowed me to use this photo of him. Now, when he retired in the 50s, he had a lot of time on his hands, and he'd always been interested in ancient sites. And being a architect and all this, and a surveyor and all this, he went out with his theodolite, and he visited over 300 of the ancient sites in Britain, and carefully mapped them all out. He surveyed them, carefully mapped them all out, and it's only thanks to him that we really know anything about this. And he was actually at Castle Rigg. Now, at Castle Rigg, there's a thing called an outlier, and although that's a great word in Countdown, if outliers, it's a good word, it scores you a lot. But it's actually a stone that's outside the main body of the stone circle, and he found an alignment with this outlier, and thought, oh, I'm onto something here. Actually, what he didn't know was that outlier stone had been moved from when a road was built, and actually at one time it was in the ground because it's actually got plough marks on it. But although that alignment wasn't a true one, because he found that one, he started to look for the other ones, and that was how he found all the other alignments at Castle Rigg. Now, in the end, when he started looking for alignments at other ancient sites, and he found loads and loads of them were aligned in different ways. And he published a book in the 60s, which was called, was sort of like British Ancient Sites or something it was called, where he spoke about these alignments, and academia totally rubbished it. No, the Neolithic people wouldn't have been clever enough to do that. They couldn't possibly have done that. And he was totally ridiculed about it, but he stuck to his guns. He knew he was right, and he kept going and going, and he published more books. And there was a television program made about him called Cracking the Stone Age Code, it was called. There's now actually a book about him by a guy called Robin Heath, called Cracking the Stone Age Code, and that's all just about Thom and his work. So that's really good. So quite an interesting bloke. He was a Scottish guy. He had a cold bath every day outside, despite whatever the weather was like. So he was quite a hardy soul, really. And his friends called him Sandy. Anyway, so he's who we've got to thank for it all, anyway. And these are just some of the sites that he visited. They're all over the British Isles and in Ireland. There are tons and tons and tons of ancient sites. So who built them? Who built these sites? Well, it's a race of people known as the Beaker people, who they came to here from Europe about 5,000 years ago. And I'm sure many of you will be very, very grateful to them, because they were actually the people that introduced barley into Britain. So without them, we wouldn't have beer. So they're called the Beaker people because in lots of the ancient sites, when they've start digging them all up, when they're surveying them and finding them doing these archaeological digs, they find that these beakers, they're only about 6-7 inches high. They're handmade. They didn't have potter's wheels or anything like that. And normally they have cremated human bones in them as well. And they've been found at tons and tons of ancient sites all over Britain. So that's why they've been called the Beaker people. They were said that they were taller than modern day human beings, and also that they spoke a language which was rather similar to Welsh. This is only a postulation where we don't really know for certain, and it would be a gross generalisation to say that all Welsh people are big and play rugby. But certainly, when you see the Welsh rugby team, you could imagine them shifting large stones around quite easily. But this is an artist's impression of what the Beaker people look like. And to this day, when the Welsh are still building stone circles, they have their Eisteddfod, which is a festival of bards, and they always mark the location wherever they have it every year. They always mark the location by building a stone circle where they've had it, and the stones are always aligned with the midsummer sunrise and the midwinter sunset, which is exactly the same as Stonehenge and many other sites. These are all modern stone circles that have been built like in the 20th century. And I've actually visited some of them as well. So often they're in like school playgrounds and things like that. It's quite fascinating. And that's sort of what it looks like when they're there. All the druids, the bards, ovates and druids and all that, having a good time. The Gorsedd, which is the chiefs of the festival, they always meet in these stone circles to decide where the next Eisteddfod will take place. So, getting back to the Beaker people, the Books of Enoch mentions a group called the Watchers, who lived at 51 to 59 degrees of latitude, which is exactly the latitude of the British Isles. That covers everything from Cornwall right up to Orkney. Then the Watchers, they were said to. I meant to show you that that's 51 to 59 degrees of latitude. Okay. So, where have we gone to that? Oh yes. Now, the Watchers were said to have been angels that came down to Earth. Some say that they were extraterrestrials, and they mated with human women to produce a tall race known as the Nephilim, which comes from the Aramaic word Nephilia, which is the name of the constellation of Orion, which is the giant hunter, the biggest constellation that you see in the winter sky. Interestingly, the Australian Aborigines identified their own version of Watchers. Now, you'll excuse me for this. There's nobody who speaks Aborigine here, is there? No. Neither do I. now the Aborigines called them the Nurrumbunga Titters. And those people, these watchers that the Aborigines said to have come from Orion, funnily enough. This is fascinating because the Aborigines were actually thought to have been cut off from the rest of the world for 40,000 years. So how did they come up with this same story? Also, ancient Egyptians believed in intermediaries between gods and men. Good evening. And they were called the Urshu, which translates as watchers. So we've got these three completely different cultures, all got this idea of these watchers coming to this planet from somewhere else. Now recently some skeletons were found in Greece. We've got a few pictures of them here. These pictures were actually sent to me while I was actually writing the talk, which is a bit strange. And they're all of these giants. Now these have all been proved to be fake, as it's turned out. It's that great technique Photoshop has proved them to be fake. But actually in Peru, no, that's not right. Oh, I know what it is. There's actually, I did put an extra slide in, and it's obviously not saved on the thing. Yes, there's actually a skeleton in Peru of a genuine giant that was about 8 feet tall. But even more than that, the Smithsonian Institute in America have been found out by law to have destroyed 10,000 skeletons of people who were between 6 and 12 feet high. And when they were accused of this, they took the accuser to law, and then in the courtroom he produced this genuine female femur of somebody who had been about 10 foot tall, because he'd worked at the Smithsonian Institute and had stolen one of the bones. And the reason that the Smithsonian Institute destroyed all these skeletons is because it didn't fit in with their theory of evolution. So it could be true. So anyway, so I found all these watchers, beaker people, Nephilim connection, all very interesting. Now this is New Grange in Ireland. It's in the Boyne Valley, and it's 20 miles north of Dublin. I went there in 1998, and it was excavated and rebuilt in the early 60s. And what they discovered when they were excavating it, it looks like a giant UFO sitting on the hill. It's quite fascinating. The great thing about New Grange, if you go there, is that they've got a visitor centre about a mile away, and they only take one minibus up at a time of people. So it's not like going to Stonehenge or some of the other sites where you end up with coachloads of people all over the place. And it's really fascinating because it's just enough people for you all to go inside, because there's a chamber inside 100 metres long. Well, what they found when they were excavating it, this is the entrance. There's that beautifully decorated entrance stone in the foreground there. The interesting thing is that light box that is above the main entrance. Now, at the midwinter sunrise, the sun shines through that light box right down this 100-foot long chamber, and the light comes to rest. The light of the sun comes to rest at the end chamber, where there's a scooped out stone, where they believe that at the midwinter sunrise, they would believe that the ancient people with the midwinter solstice, that the sun was reborn, and also it was a good time for like ancestors to be reborn. So they would put the bones of the ancestors on this hollowed out stone, and the light of the sun at the winter solstice would light it. And they can actually, it doesn't matter what time of the year you go there, because they recreate it now. They've got an orange bulb in there, so they turn all the lights out inside, and then they slowly turn up the orange bulb, and it comes down, and you see the sun creep down the alley. And the clever thing is that the way that they've made that tunnel, that channel, is that it weaves slightly, so you only get just the one shaft of sunlight come down. It's almost like it's filtered down it. It's quite fascinating. But the interesting thing is, every 8 years, Venus is in the right position to rise before the sun and shine through that same light box down that same channel. And it only happens because on the other 7 years, it's either rising after the sun, in which case you're not going to see it because the sun's up, or it's not at the right latitude. So this only happens every 8 years. Now, if we go back to the rise, the sun rises. That's it. And we go back to like Uriel's machine. We see the sun's movements over the course of a year can be represented by a diagonal cross. So if you think of those extreme positions, right? So you've got a cross, okay? Can you all see that? You'll get the idea, yeah? So to the Neolithic mind, the simplest way of representing a year would be to do a cross. And on the lintel, so you can see it there. So you've got north, south, east, west, and you've got the cross there. Now, this lintel is above the roof box. And as you can see, it's got 8 crosses. So it shows that they knew that Venus would be in the right position every 8th year. So it's quite fascinating. This is something, that this was only discovered by in the 90s by those 2 Freemasons. Now, if we move on to Stonehenge, now there's been observations going on at Stonehenge since the end of the Ice Age, like 10,000 years ago. When in 1966 they decided to extend the car park at Stonehenge, they found these 3 post holes, these giant post holes, which would have held trees that would have probably been tens of feet high. And they have no idea. They could have been some sort of totem poles, they could have been observation poles or something. We don't know what they were, but we do know that they were there 10,000 years ago. And that's the Mesolithic era. Now, then Stonehenge 1 was built. Now, Stonehenge 1, I mean, the thing that we see today as Stonehenge is actually the ruination of Stonehenge 3C, which is what the archaeologists have called it. But the original Stonehenge consisted of the henge, which is the ditch and the bank that you see going around the outside, and it was aligned. We know it was aligned using post holes because there's tons of post holes there. So just as I showed you earlier on how they were building Uriel's machine by driving posts into the ground, the Neolithic people were doing that at Stonehenge a long time ago. And the heel stone, which is an outlier, which you'll see in a minute, that alignment originally was with the summer solstice rising of the moon. So originally Stonehenge was a lunar temple, not a sun one. That's the heel stone that the moon rise behind. Now, then they had enough of that. Obviously, there had been some sort of shift in the culture or the religious beliefs or whatever, and they changed it to Stonehenge 2, where the first stones arrive. Now, if you can see those 4 stones there that are marked 91, 92, 93, 94, yeah? Can you see them okay? The ones that are by the bank, those are called the station stones. They were the first stones to arrive, and then there were some blue stones in the centre of the circle, and they moved the axis of the circle so that it aligned with the midsummer sunrise, which is what people all go to Stonehenge to see now. They all stand in the centre and watch the sunrise from behind the heel stone.
Excuse me, what
yes?
sort of period was that when they did that change?
About 3,500 years ago.
So was that from the gradual change from matriarchal society to patriarchal?
I would say I would change it from goddess worship, or moon worship, to sun worship. So that's what you see that's what you're meant to see. Of course, we know this being Britain, that it's always cloudy at the midsummer sunrise, and they stand there in the rain with their umbrellas and don't see anything. What's interesting is if you change to the midwinter sunset, anything that is aligned with the midsummer sunrise is also aligned in reverse with the midwinter sunset, and that is what happens at Stonehenge. But the interesting thing is, if you stand in the centre at Stonehenge and watch the sunset, you'll see the sun set between the outer trilithon there. You're looking through the great trilithon here, which you can't, there's only one stone of it standing now, but never mind. But this is what it would have looked like. Of course, this is an artist's impression, and the artist in question is myself. As you can see, I'm very, very qualified. If any of you need a drawing doing afterwards, just see me, I do commissions. And so after the sun has set, later on the moon is seen to travel between the top of the inner trilithon, the great trilithon, and the trilithon in the circle on the outside. And some people say this shows that actually the moon was revered more, but we don't know. This is called I talked about those 4 station stones, which are the four stones that were the first stones to arrive at Stonehenge, long before the blue stones, long before the great trilithons or the trilithon circle. There's only one of the 4 left now. The other 3 have disappeared, like so much of Stonehenge has disappeared. And the interesting, they're called the station stones because they mark the extreme rising and setting positions of the sun and the moon, which is what this diagram is about. So observing from one stone to the other in different directions, you've got all the extreme rising and setting positions of the sun and the moon. And I say, for those of you who have arrived a bit late, it's the sun one you can do over 1 or 2 or 3 years because the sun keeps rising in the same place, setting in the same place. But the moon has a nearly 19-year cycle, so you have to observe over 19 years, another 19 years. So this wasn't built overnight. It probably was put there posts initially, and then once they knew they got it right, then they put the stones there to do it. Interestingly, the outer ring of the trilithons fits exactly inside this rectangle. And also, if you go any further north or south than the latitude of Stonehenge, it doesn't become a perfect rectangle like this. It starts to get distorted one way or the other. So it could only be built at the latitude. There was only work at the latitude that Stonehenge is at. So, what else can Stonehenge be used for? Well, can you see those little the little circles, those dots going around just inside the ditch? Okay. Now these are called the Aubrey holes. They're named after John Aubrey, who was a 17th century antiquarian who went round and was very interested in ancient sites. Now we know that these holes, they never had any stones in them. They look like this. That's it there at about a third up in the centre. Not very impressive, are they? But they're there, and there's 56 of them. So why 56? Well, if you want to build something that's going to predict eclipses, you need at least 28 holes in a circle. But to be more accurate, you double it up to 56, which is what they did at Stonehenge. And they can be used for predicting eclipses. Now this is quite complicated, so I'm not going to go into the great detail of it all because I've seen people glaze over or lose the will to live as I've tried to explain it. But what you have is you have 4 stones, one representing the sun, one representing the moon, and 2 representing the nodes. The nodes are merely the point in space where the moon crosses the path of the Earth as it goes round the sun. So the Earth's coming along like this, the moon's going round, that's a node, and that's a node, okay? And when the sun, and you move these stones at different amounts. So you move the node stones 3 moves a year, so like every 4 months. The sun, you move 1 hole every 13 days, and you move the moon every 2 holes every day. And when the sun and the moon stones are in the same quadrant, the same section as where the node stones are, that's when you're going to get an eclipse. So, and the ancient people, obviously, to them, the sun was the god, the moon was the goddess, and it was a celestial marriage when they came together. So that was why they would want to predict eclipses. This was worked out by the physicist Fred Hoyle in the 60s. Okay, so we now move on to where we're off to tomorrow. That's me and Neil, to Bryn Cyddi Ddu on Anglesey. Now, this is a line to the summer solstice sunrise, and that's the entrance there. There's another entrance round the back, where there's this standing stone there. That standing stone is actually just a cast. They decided that the stone had stood there 5,000 years and it was in danger of rotting away. So they made a cast of it. The actual stone is in the Cardiff Museum. So this is just a plaster cast of it. Don't ask me why. But you see that there's that sort of dagger type hole in the entrance at the top there. Now what they found, these low mass and was that inside there's a pillar inside, and near the winter solstice the sun shines through that dagger hole, and as the sun rises up the light travels up this calibrated pillar because it's got all these marks on it that have been carved into it, and it's inside a 5-sided chamber. Now after sunset, again just like at New Grange, every 8th year the light of Venus shines through that same hole and glow goes up that same pillar. And using the calibrations on the pillar, you can work out from that how far Venus was in degrees away from the sun on that day, which is a fascinating thing. And this is one of the things that the Druids had to know, was the position of Venus. So actually, Bryn Cyddi Ddu is actually a very brilliant Neolithic Venus observatory. And as that's to prove the Venus connection, it's inside a 5-sided chamber. Now, in that 8-year cycle that Venus does, Venus apparently appears to stop it. It's called stationing and turning retrograde. It does it 5 times, and it actually makes out a pentagram, a five-sided shape. Which actually, over the years and years and years, it actually produces a rose. It looks like a rose, and of course, Venus, the goddess, is associated with love, and rose is associated with love as well. So, and also, just to really ram it home, in the entrance to the observatory, they found the skeleton of a bull, and Venus, of course, rules the sign of Taurus the bull. So they were really saying, this is it. Now this is Callanish on the Isle of Lewis in the Outer Hebrides, which I went there with Neil in 2006. You can only reach it by ferry, and Lewis is a pretty bleak place. There's no trees on the island, and this is actually Callanish A, because there are other stone circles, Callanish B, Callanish C, Callanish D, and we went to some of them, didn't we? It's very, very boggy. It's a very peat bog island, is Lewis, and the great thing about Lewis is it's such a remote area that for all those thousands of years since it was built, it's never been disturbed. So unlike Stonehenge and other ancient sites that have had their stones removed or they've been trampled all over, Callanish is almost entirely intact. And in fact, it was only discovered about 100 years ago when some sea captain came up on the island, and it was almost entirely covered in peat, so it had to be all excavated out. So that helped preserve it as well. And it's actually a lunar observatory, because when you go that far north, as you are, the latitude that you are, when the moon is at an extreme position, it's actually only skimming along the horizon. And this was discovered in the 80s, that it has various alignments. The avenue that you see at the top of the screen there, that's aligned with the major standstill of the southern moon set. The stones that are at 9 o'clock there, facing east, they are aligned with the equinox sunrises and sunsets. They also Tom also postulated that some of the stones were aligned with the rising of a star back when it was built but we don't really know that. Now, again, the most extraordinary thing about this is that when the moon is in an extreme position, here you see it skimming along the horizon. Now, the moon is apparently birthed out of this recumbent goddess figure on the left, which is known as Sleeping Beauty. And it travels across, just skimming along. We're standing at the end of the avenue here, looking north, and the moon skims along the surface and sets. It goes out, you can't see it at all. And then suddenly it appears to rise again, right behind the tallest stone in the centre of the circle. And again, this only happens every 18.61 years. So if you want to see it happen, I think the next one's in about 10 years' time, so you've got a bit of a wait. Before I talked about Orion being the place where the Watchers came from, the people who were meant to have taught the Neolithic people how to move stone circles, how to build them. Here he is again. This is what he looks like in the night sky. Here's the name of all his stars. They're all Arabic names. The one that you've probably known is Betelgeuse, probably because of the film of the same name. But the ones that we're interested in are those three in the middle. Mintaka, Elinam, and Al-Nitek. Now, you probably know, because it's been around a long time, there was a book probably out in the 70s, I think, it was the Orion Connection. Does that ring any bells? What they found was those three stars are aligned with the three pyramids at Giza. And in fact, there's also another couple of pyramids that exactly align with the stars of Orion. And it's thought that the Egyptians were actually going to build the whole of the constellation of Orion on the ground, but pyramid building went out of fashion and they started burying pharaohs instead in like the Valley of the Kings instead of in pyramids anymore. So it was never finished. But anyway, what's interesting is at the same time as the pyramids were being built, in Britain, they were building this. This is Thornborough Henge, or the Thornborough Henges, because there's three of them. And I've been here a few times as well. Neil does a trip, don't you, to there. And these are aligned in exactly the same way as the Giza pyramids, and they're in line with those three stars in Orion's belt. It must have looked pretty impressive when it was built, but it's unfortunately with time it's been eroded. This is the centre one. In the most northern one is the best preserved because it's actually got trees have grown all over it, which means it's not got eroded in the same way, and you can actually see what it would have more have been like 5,000 years ago. The other two are much more eroded. And I've actually spent the night in the southern one because they have a camp there every year, and I went there 3 years ago and spoke there about the henge and all that, actually in the henge, which was quite exciting. You don't often get to talk about sites actually within the sites.
Where is this? Where is it?
It's in Yorkshire. Do you know the Devil's Arrows?
Yes.
It's very close to them. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of quarrying all around the site. It's been threatened quite a few times, but there's been petitions to save it. There we see the alignment of the three of them, but it has an even more Orion connection because, let me get this right. Well, actually, I could tell you how do you make it. It's quite simple to make this alignment. All you need, there you see it again. That's the southern one there, and then you've got the middle one, and then in the north you can see the northern one is covered in trees. And how you do this? We use a sighting stick. It's as simple as that. All you do is align it with the horizon, and you get your hand and holding the stick, and you get your hand in line and the eye in line with the horizon. And then you just find the altitude, the latitude of the star by lining up the end of the stick with it. And through doing this, you can then transfer that to the ground. And now, what time of year is it? I think it's the winter solstice. Yes. So also, from the centre henge, Orion will be seen to rise in the entrance to the southern henge at midwinter. So you've got a double Orion link there at Thornborough. So Thornborough twice is aligned with the constellation of Orion, just like the pyramids. Now, this is the final one we're going to have a look at. This is a bit of a Neolithic observatory of a different kind. This is at Brainport Bay near Minard in Argyll, overlooking Loch Fyne. Here we see two standing stones. It's difficult to see the one in the foreground, but it is there, I assure you. And you can see the one in the background, and then beyond you've got the mountains way beyond that. And these act as a foresight to the setting sun. Now, here we have a plan of the site. Oh no, this is the viewing platform, sorry. You've got those two standing stones, and then you go back a long way, and there's this viewing platform. This is the best photo I could get of it, actually. And the viewing platform, it's thought that it was probably made of wood, and it's all rotted away now. But under that viewing platform, they found these stones. This is a plan of the site, which doesn't really show you much, but that's the idea. That shows you the sunset. So you can see the standing stone there at the bottom of the picture in the silhouette, and you can see the sun setting behind the mountains. Now, from this backside, you can watch the sunset, and these are lines with the mountains on the horizon. So this enables the observer to very accurately measure the movements of the sun over years and years and years, because the sun doesn't actually rise and set in exactly the same place over the course of the year. It's rough enough for the Uriel's machine for you to find the extreme positions, but there's actually a very slight shift, and that's over a period of 33 years. So, now you can only notice this if you have a foresight and a backsight that are long distance apart, such as you've got up here in Scotland. Now, under the viewing platform at the backside, which is a natural shelf in the rock, were found 33 water-worn quartz pebbles about 2 centimetres in diameter, probably kept in a leather bag that's now long rotted away. Now, in 2006, on that same trip that I went with Neil over there, when we went up to the Highlands and Islands, and we went over to Lewis, and we visited many wonderful other sites, like on the Arran, the island of Arran has got tons and tons. It's like a Neolithic playground. It just goes on, and you've got stone circles, temples, tombs, standing stones. It's a fascinating place. You just walk for miles. Fantastic, all unspoilt. But also on that journey, we also went very close to this site, and the stones, which I can show you now, these are those pebbles as they were found in situ, 33 of them. The stones are now in the Kilmartin Museum. Now, it just so happened, because on these journeys that I go on with Neil, there's sometimes quite a bit of a distance between some of these sites, aren't there? So you're travelling, tens of miles some days. So I took this little book with me. Now, I mentioned earlier Robin Heath, who wrote the book about Professor Tom, cracking the Stone Age code. Robin's also written a book called PowerPoints, which is all about different ley lines in Britain. You all know what ley lines are? Yeah? Yeah? Sure? And so I'm sitting in the minibus reading this book, and it starts talking about this site, which I didn't know we were going to or anything. I didn't know anything about it. And it says, and the stones are now kept in the Kilmartin Museum. So I read this. I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I tell you that 10 seconds later, Neil said, well, we're now approaching the Kilmartin Museum where we're going to stop for lunch. So I just could not believe it. After that thing with Uriel's machine and reading that book and the Roslin Chapel, this one was even more astounding. So we got to the Kilmartin Museum, and everybody else rushed off to get their lunch because they're all starving. I nipped into the museum entrance and said, with my book, and said, I've just been reading about these stones. Can I go and see them? They said, if you go in the exit, you can go in. You don't have to pay. Just nip in the exit, and you can see them. So I nipped in there and took a photo of them, which because they're behind glass, like to use flash photography, it didn't come out very well. So I thought this was absolutely fascinating. So it was obviously meant to be. It was one of those synchronistic moments. Now, so as I say, if you observe over a long period of time, over 33 years, you'll see that the sun finally, after 33 years, returns to the same point. Now, what is the significance of the number 33? Well, it's quite interesting actually, because the significance of the 33-year solar cycle we quite hear about in Celtic legends, especially Irish ones, where the number 33 comes up time and time again. For example, this is Lu, the god Lu. One of the festivals of the year, Lunasa, is named after him. It means the commemoration of Lu. And also Ludgate in London is named after him. Now, Lu was a sun god. Now, he fights a battle. It was called the First Battle of Mag Tuired, alongside 32 other leaders. And whilst the second battle is recorded as being fought by 33 leaders of Formor, descendants of another Celtic sun god. 33 years, of course, is also the age at which Jesus was crucified and resurrected, just as the sun is resurrected each day at dawn after the dying at dusk. In the Celtic calendar, the sun was reborn at the winter solstice, which conveniently is when Jesus was born as well. So we have gone from the sun god's return to the Son of God's return. It's only a small shift. So Jesus is a solar deity, also known as the light of the world, and so he has to die at 33. And in Freemasonry, there are actually, we come back to Freemasonry again, in Freemasonry there are actually 33 degrees. And in the Kabbalah, anybody studied the Kabbalah here? It's a Jewish spirituality system. It sort of raised its head about 10 years ago because people like Madonna and Mick Jagger were all into it. It's not a religion or anything, or a belief system, it's a spiritual system. And it has these 11 things called the Sephirah. The bottom one is Malkuth, which is the earth plane, and the top one is Ketha, the crown, which is like the heavens. And the energy comes down in manifestation. There's a whole load of stuff on it. But on that, it's called the Tree of Life. That's the Kabbalistic Tree of Life. And on it, there are 33 paths. Also, in the human in the human spine, there are 33 vertebrae. Except for my friend Kylie, who's got 35, and she's having a load of back problems because of this. But there we go. And also, in the Star of David, in the words Star of David, and also in the word Amen, in numerology, which is a way of assigning numbers to the different letters of the alphabet, and then you add them up and reduce them down, they both come out as 33. Also, for Tolkien fans, J.R.R. Tolkien tells us that 33 is the age at which a hobbit becomes of age. So, was he tapping into something that he knew something about there, or is it just a coincidence? We don't know. So finally, I'm going to turn to something else that is found in all ancient Neolithic observatories, and that's a thing called the Megalithic Yard. Now, the Megalithic Yard, this unit was found again by the great Professor Thom, and it's 2.72 feet. Now, in fact, the unit really was 1.36 feet, which is 16.32 inches, but he doubled it to make it closer to the modern yard. So the real unit he called the half megalithic yard, but that doesn't sort of trip off the tongue so well. So here you can see, well, maybe you can or maybe you can't, but those station stones, that station stone rectangle that I showed you before, is 12 by 5 units of 8 megalithic yards. And the centre of the monument to the heel stone is 12 units of 8 megalithic yards. And this megalithic yard is found again and again and again in lots of the ancient sites. But what Tom couldn't work out is where they got this unit from. Now we come back again to this Uriel's Machine book by Christopher Knight and Robert Lomas. And the answer actually lies within Uriel's Machine. Knight and Lomas addressed the idea that the megalithic yard was probably devised from the stars and set about how it could be done, and they came up with this theory. You first construct a circle with a rope and a marker, which is easy enough to do. You then divide the circle's circumference into 366 equal parts, not 360, using trial and error. Now why 366? Because that's the number of sunrises that there are in a year. So each 366 division they call a megalithic degree. In fact, you only have to divide a quarter of it, a sixth of the circumference. Instead of having 60 degrees, you have 61. So that's pretty close. You erect 2 posts a megalithic degree apart. So you're on it. So you're on a nice big circle, and then you put the 2 posts and the 366th of a degree apart. And to measure time, what you do is you observe the time it takes for a fixed star. On the lower bit of the diagram, near the top, I've drawn a little star with an arrow showing that it's moving from left to right. And all you have to do to measure the time it takes for that star to move from across that megalithic degree. Now, to do that, you need the oldest thing that there is for keeping time, which is a pendulum. And the length, and by observing the star going across. Now, remember, in the night sky back in the Neolithic times, you'd have tons of stars. If you didn't get the swinging right on the pendulum, it didn't matter, because another star would be along in 5 minutes' time. So you could practice this with trial and error and just keep going and going and going. Then what you do is you adjust the length of the pendulum so it beats, i.e. swings back and forth, 366 times whilst the star travels between the 2 posts. Now, if you can do this, then the length of the pendulum will be 1.36 feet exactly, and it only works if the pendulum is that length, and that is the length, that's half a megalithic yard. So the great thing about this is, the great argument that was always found was, well, there's never been a megalithic yardstick found. Well, the fact is, using this method, you don't need to have a megalithic yardstick. You can find the length of your pendulum by using this method. So, thus the Ubika people of Neolithic times built into their observatories a unit linked to the orbit of the Earth, rotation of the Earth on its axis, and the mass of the Earth. So how does that work? Well, the orbit gave 366 split of the horizon. The rotation gave the time span, since that's what makes the star move. It's actually the star isn't moving; it's actually fixed. It's the Earth's rotation, and the mass of the planet, which is gravity, dictated the length of the line to give 366 beats. So, as Knight and Lomas say in their book, simply brilliant. It also explains why archaeologists have found a megalithic yardstick. So, I'll close with this one. Which one's this, Neil? No, it's Swinside. This is actually Neil's favourite one. So he says. Swinside. That's Swinside, which is aligned to the winter solstice sunset, just like its cousin Long Meg is. Swinside is near Broughton-in-Furness in Cumbria. Have any of you been to it? 1, 2, 3. It's 4. Keep going. No, it's a fascinating circle to get to. You have to drive to this little village on the outside. There's only room for a couple of cars, and you have to walk down a farm track for about a mile. It's on private land, but the farmer's quite friendly, and he's quite happy for you to go amongst the stones. A fascinating site, and again another Neolithic one. My own personal favourite is Castle Rigg. When you go to Castle Rigg, I've been at Castle Rigg at dawn, I've been there at sunset, I've been involved in rituals there, I've been there on my own, I've been there with crowds of people like at the solstices. Absolutely beautiful place, and when you stand there, as you all know who've been there, it's like you're on top of the world, because all the way around you're surrounded by all the wondrous fells. It's an absolutely magical place any time of year. It's also the most visited stone circle, probably apart from Stonehenge and Avebury perhaps in Britain. Always full of tourists and sometimes sheep as well. Fascinating place, and I say it's aligned to all the sunrises of the calendar in the Celtic Wheel of the Year. If you want to know more about Castle Rigg or Long Meg and Her Daughters, I have 2 books for sale. This is one of mine, the Rowan Guide to Castle Rigg Stone Circle, and also I have another one called Spirals on Circles, which is about Long Meg, Little Meg, and Glastonbury stone circles, which all lie within a mile of each other in the beautiful Eden Valley over east of Penrith. So I hope you've enjoyed this walk in the footsteps of your Neolithic ancestors and admired their tenacity and their skill and the amazing way that they created these Neolithic observatories. And I'll end you with, that's all folks. So thank you very much.